At 9:03 on a Saturday evening, the most feared Mafia don in the city collapsed on the floor of a private dining room, and every heavily armed man in his entourage froze in pure terror. I was just the plus-size dishwasher washing soup bowls in the back kitchen, or at least, that's what they thought I was. They didn't know that before a billion-dollar pharmaceutical company destroyed my life, I was one of the top clinical toxicologists in the country. And when I looked through the pass-through window and saw the Don wipe his numb lips before he fell, I knew with the absolute cold certainty of 14 years of training exactly what rare, untraceable poison was currently stopping his heart. I had approximately 20 minutes to save the life of a ruthless crime lord before the treatment window closed forever. After that, no amount of money or power or fear would matter. His sodium ion channels would fail. His heart would lose rhythm, and he would die on the floor of his own private dining room while 6 men with guns watched and could do nothing. So I set down the bowl. I dried my hands on my apron, and I walked out of the kitchen into a room full of loaded guns and told the most dangerous men in the city that the fat dishwasher was the only person on earth who could keep their boss alive. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back, because you need to understand what a clinical toxicologist was doing at a dish sink, and you need to understand what was taken from me before you can understand what that dining room floor gave back. My name is Nell Gorley. I am 38 years old. I have been plus size since my 14th birthday, and I have spent 20 years navigating a world that believes what you look like tells it something meaningful about what you know. I'm a clinical toxicologist. Or I was. The distinction still cuts. 4 years later, the way a paper cut does, small enough that nobody notices, deep enough that it never quite heals. I was the person hospitals called at 3 a.m. when someone came in with an unknown substance in their system, and the window between we think it might be X and his heart has stopped was measured in single-digit minutes. Poisons, overdoses, industrial accidents, drug interactions that turned ordinary medication lethal. I was the woman on the phone who said, it's aconitine or it's organophosphate or it's a tricyclic cascade, and you have 4 minutes, and the doctor on the other end trusted me because I was right. I was always right. In 14 years, I never lost a patient to a substance I couldn't identify. I wrote my master's thesis on aconitine, a potent plant-based alkaloid derived from monkshood, sometimes called wolfsbane. 6,000 words on the most elegant poison in the natural world. I knew its symptom cascade the way a musician knows a scale. Lip numbness first, then fingertip tingling, then progressive bradycardia as the sodium channels in the heart muscle begin to fail. I knew the detection sequence, the metabolite signature, and the treatment protocol, not just academically, but the way a surgeon knows the body through repetition and crisis and the specific muscle memory of saving lives in real time. I was good at what I did. I need you to hear me say that, because the world has spent 4 years telling me I wasn't, and the world was wrong. 4 years ago, I was called to testify against Havardin Pharmaceuticals. They had mislabeled a drug's interaction profile, a cardiac medication that, combined with a common antihistamine, produced a metabolite that was functionally toxic. People had died. Not many. Enough. I was asked to review the data and give my opinion under oath, and my opinion was that Havardin had known about the interaction for 18 months and had buried the report because pulling the drug would cost them $400 million in quarterly revenue. I told the truth, under oath, with my name on the record, and I was right. In response, Havardin's legal team, 47 lawyers and a budget the size of a small country's GDP, spent 18 months dismantling me. They found every email I'd ever sent that could be read 2 ways. They magnified clerical errors into professional misconduct. They hired expert witnesses who questioned my methodology with the specific surgical cruelty of people who are being paid $600 an hour to sound reasonable while they destroy someone. They didn't need to prove I was wrong. They needed to make the jury uncertain. And uncertainty, when it is manufactured by experts, looks exactly like incompetence. The hospital fired me. My medical license was suspended pending review, which is a polite way of saying permanently. My husband, Colin, who had married a promising toxicologist and was now married to an unemployed, disgraced, plus-size woman with her name in the wrong kind of headlines, sat me down at our kitchen table and told me he couldn't do this anymore, which is the sentence men use when they mean the version of you I signed up for no longer exists. I lost my career, my license, my marriage, my home, my name. Not the letters of it, but the weight of it. The thing that used to mean she knows what she's talking about, and now meant the fat woman who got fired. I moved into a studio flat above a laundrette. I applied for work at every laboratory, clinic, and research facility that would take my CV. None of them would. The Haverden case had turned my name into a liability. I was the woman who challenged a pharmaceutical giant and lost, and in the professional world, that doesn't make you brave. It makes you radioactive. I took a job washing dishes in the back kitchen of Palazzo Rosso, a high-end Italian restaurant with a very specific, very dangerous clientele. I showed up at 6. I washed things, I went home. I did not think about aconitine or sodium ion channels or the 6,000 words I had written about the most elegant poison in the world. I was a dishwasher. That was all. Except it wasn't, because you cannot take what someone knows by taking their title. The knowledge is still there, alive, waiting, curled in the muscle memory of a woman who spent 14 years saving lives and has not forgotten a single protocol. That Saturday evening I was at my station, elbow deep in soapy water, the radio on low, the kitchen humming the way kitchens hum at the end of a long service, when I glanced through the pass-through window. The private dining room at Palazzo Rosso was used perhaps once a month, and when it was used, the front-of-house staff walked differently, quieter, more careful. The room had its own entrance, its own kitchen pass, and its own particular silence, the silence of a space where the people inside it were accustomed to being obeyed. The man at the center of the table was perhaps 57, compact, silver-haired, in a dark suit that communicated everything to the right observer. Don Raphael Correnti. I didn't know his name then. I learned it later, the way you learn the name of the person whose life you saved after the saving is done. What I knew was the room, 5 men leaning in when he spoke, the specific lean of people for whom attention is discipline, not courtesy. At 8:47, through the grease-smeared glass of the pass-through window, I noticed something. The Don touched his lips, not dramatically. A small, almost involuntary gesture, the way you'd touch your face if it had gone slightly numb. He did it once. He did it again 90 seconds later. Then he picked up his wine glass, and his hand on the stem looked slightly less fluid than it had a moment ago. Not a tremor, not a shake. Just a fraction of a second's hesitation between intention and grip, as if the signal from his brain to his fingers had taken a detour it shouldn't have. The men around him didn't notice. They were watching his mouth, waiting for words. They didn't see the lips.
I did.
Because the first sign of aconitine poisoning before the nausea, before the heart rate drops, before the cascade that kills is a tingling and numbness that begins at the lips and spreads to the fingertips. It is subtle, it is fast, and by the time a normal doctor recognizes it, the window for treatment has already begun to close. I stood at my sink. I watched through the window. I told myself, you're a dishwasher, you're seeing things, you're projecting your expertise onto a man who probably just burned his mouth on the soup. At 9:03 I heard the silence. The fall was quiet. Not the dramatic crash of a man falling from a chair, the slow, controlled descent of a man whose body has begun to betray him and whose discipline means he goes down carefully, one hand on the table, the other reaching for nothing. It was the silence afterward that told me everything. The specific silence of highly trained, heavily armed men discovering that they had no protocol for this particular kind of wrong. Because you can protect a man from a bullet. You can sweep a room for explosives. You can intercept a knife. But you cannot intercept a poison that was placed in a single wine glass by someone who was already inside the perimeter. And you cannot shoot your way out of aconitine. And the men in that room, men who had devoted their lives to keeping this man alive, were suddenly, terrifyingly useless. Aconitine disrupts the sodium ion channels in the heart muscle, slowing conduction, dropping the heart rate until it drives the rhythm into a pattern the heart cannot sustain. Ventricular tachycardia, then fibrillation, then nothing. In an untreated moderate dose, death occurs within 2 to 6 hours. But the treatment window, the narrow margin where intervention can still change the outcome, is approximately 20 minutes from the onset of cardiac symptoms. I counted backward. Lip numbness at 8:47, grip hesitation at 8:50, collapse at 9:03. The cascade was moving fast. That meant the dose was concentrated. That meant the 20-minute window was already shrinking. I dried my hands. I took off my rubber gloves. I walked out of the kitchen. When I crossed the threshold into the dining room, a man at the door drew his weapon and pointed it at my chest. I did not stop walking. I understand, in retrospect, that this was either very brave or very stupid. A plus-size woman in a stained dishwasher's apron, walking into a room full of armed men. I can see how that might look like a threat, or a disruption, or at minimum a person who needed to be stopped and assessed. But I had 17 minutes left on a clock that nobody else in the room knew was running, and I did not have time to be afraid of a gun. "My name is Nell Gorley," I said, my voice carrying across the room the way it used to carry across emergency wards, calm, clear, absolutely certain. "I am a clinical toxicologist. I know exactly what is happening to this man, and I know that the treatment window closes in approximately 17 minutes. Someone needs to make a decision right now about whether to trust me because I'm all you have and I'm not going to ask twice." The consigliere, an older man, sharp-eyed, the kind of face that files information the way a computer stores data, looked at me for exactly 3 seconds. He was making a calculation. The calculation was, the woman in the apron knows the word toxicologist, and the way she said it was not a guess. "Talk," he said. I went to the floor. I knelt beside Don Rafael Correnti, and up close the gray-white color of his skin was worse than it had looked through the window. His pupils were constricted, sweat on his temples. "Are your lips numb?" I asked. "Yes," he said. His words were slightly thickened, the speech of a man whose tongue is beginning to lose sensation. "Your fingertips?" He tried to flex his right hand. The movement was sluggish. He looked at his own hand as if it had betrayed him. "You have been poisoned," I told him, without softening, without apology, because a dying man deserves the truth delivered fast. "The substance is aconitine, a plant-based alkaloid that disrupts sodium ion channels in the heart. There is no specific antidote, but we are inside the treatment window. What I am going to do in the next 30 minutes will keep you alive. Do I have your permission to direct this?" He looked at me, a man who has spent decades making decisions, making one more. His eyes were steady even as his body was failing, the specific discipline of a man who does not allow his circumstances to control his composure. "Yes," he said. I turned to the consigliere. "Do not call an ambulance. An ambulance crew will treat this as a standard cardiac event. They'll give him beta blockers or adenosine, and either one will kill him. I need someone to go to the pharmacy on Via Carmine. It's 7 minutes away. It has a 24-hour window. I need medical-grade activated charcoal and atropine sulfate. Tell the pharmacist it's an emergency cardiac prescription. Take cash, not questions." A man ran. I turned to another. "From the kitchen, culinary-grade charcoal. There's a bag on the shelf above the prep station. Bring it and bring water." The guard with the gun was still pointing it at me. "Tommaso," the Don said from the floor. His voice was slow, the aconitine thickening his speech, but the authority in it was absolute. A dying man on his back with his heart rate dropping toward 40, and the room still obeyed the sound of his voice. "Put it down," the Don said. "That's my toxicologist you're pointing a gun at." "My toxicologist." He said it the way you'd say my doctor or my surgeon, with the casual, permanent possessiveness of a man who has decided that a thing belongs to him. I had been in his world for 90 seconds. I had been a dishwasher 45 seconds before that. And the most powerful man in the city from the floor, with his heart failing, had claimed me. Tommaso lowered the gun, fast, as if the metal had burned him. "Thank you," I said to the Don. "Now stop talking and let me work." He did something I didn't expect. He smiled. It was small, and it cost him. I could see the effort it took, the way the muscles in his face were beginning to resist, but it was real. A man whose body was shutting down, smiling at the fat dishwasher who'd told him to stop talking. "Tell me about your daughter," I said, because I needed him conscious, and talking is the rope you throw to a man who is drowning. "You mentioned her earlier tonight. I heard it through the window." "You were listening through the window?" "I wash dishes next to a pass-through. You'd be amazed what I hear." "Sophia," he said. "She's in Florence, studying art restoration. She takes broken things and makes them whole again. Like mother, like daughter," I said before I could stop myself, and he looked at me, really looked, from the floor, dying, with the kind of clear-eyed attention that men usually reserve for moments of absolute importance. And he said, "No, like you." The culinary charcoal arrived first. I mixed it with water, a thick, black, deeply unappetizing paste, and I held the cup to his mouth and told him to drink it. The charcoal would bind whatever aconitine was still in his stomach, preventing further absorption. He drank without complaint, without grimace. The most fastidious man in the room, a man who had been drinking expensive wine from Crystal 20 minutes ago, drank charcoal paste from a kitchen glass held by a dishwasher's pruned hand, and he did it with the quiet dignity of a man whose self-discipline is his deepest armor. At 9:22, the runner returned from the pharmacy. I checked the atropine sulfate, correct concentration, sealed vial, unexpired. Atropine blocks the vagal signal that was driving his heart rate down. Without an IV, and I didn't have IV access, I was working with pharmacy supplies on a dining room floor. I had to administer it sublingually under the tongue, where the mucous membrane would absorb it directly into the bloodstream. I looked at the consigliere. I want to be clear about something. I no longer hold a clinical license. What I'm about to do is technically practicing medicine without authorization. I am telling you this because you deserve to know, and because if this goes wrong, the liability is real. The consigliere looked at the Don on the floor. He looked at me. Do it, he said. I placed the atropine under the Don's tongue. I sat back on my heels and took his wrist. 49 beats per minute, slow, too slow. The atropine needed time to work. I kept my face entirely composed, because in a clinical crisis, the room looks at your face to know if there is still time. If the clinician looks calm, there is time. If the clinician looks frightened, there isn't. I have kept my face steady through situations that would break most people, and this was no different except that the patient was a crime lord. The operating theater was a dining room floor, and the surgical team was 5 armed men who would kill me if their boss died. I held his wrist. I counted. I asked him about Sophia. He told me she was restoring a Baroque ceiling in a church, painstaking months of work, brushstroke by brushstroke, rebuilding something beautiful from damage. At 9:32, his pulse was 51, still slow, not climbing. At 9:38, it was 54, a tick up. The atropine was engaging. At 9:44, 62 beats per minute. Regular, strong. The color around his mouth, which had been the gray-white of a man whose circulatory system was giving up, was returning. Pink at the edges, like dawn, like a thing coming back to life. "You are going to be all right," I told him. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at me from the floor with those steady, assessing eyes, the eyes of a man who has spent decades reading people and deciding who they are. And he said, "I knew that already. I knew it when you sat down." At 10:15, while the Don was upright in a chair, pale, exhausted, but alive and imperious, and the consigliere was briefing their private physician on the phone, I asked to see the wine glass. Nobody objected. The fat dishwasher who had just saved the Don's life on the floor had earned a certain latitude. Aconitine in solution is nearly odorless. But if you have spent enough of your professional life with your nose in preparation vessels, if you have spent 14 years learning the faint, bitter, almost sweet signature of alkaloid compounds, you can detect the difference. It's not a smell exactly. It's an absence of smell where there should be one, a gap in the olfactory signature of wine, like a missing note in a chord. I held the glass to the light. I brought the rim close to my face. I smelled it. I looked at the consigliere. "Did everyone drink from the same bottle tonight?" "Yes," he said. "The bottle is clean," I told him, setting the glass down on the table with the specific care of a woman handling evidence. "This glass is not. The substance was added to this individual glass." Someone who had physical access to his glass tonight. Someone who poured his wine or touched his place setting, or was close enough to the table to drop something into the glass while the room was looking elsewhere, put the aconitine into it. I cannot tell you who. That is not my area of expertise. The room went very, very quiet. The silence was not the panicked silence of the collapse. It was the cold, calculating silence of men who have just received information that makes one of them a dead man. The consigliere looked at me. He filed the information into a compartment behind his eyes. A dark compartment, a separate one, the kind that doesn't have a key anyone else holds. He nodded once. Bruno, the Don's driver of 11 years, the man who had been standing behind the Don's chair all evening, the man who had poured his wine, was never seen again. I did not ask questions. That is not my area. 4 days later, Wednesday evening. I was sitting on the concrete delivery step outside the restaurant before my shift, drinking coffee from a paper cup and staring at the street the way I always did, the staring of a woman who has been invisible for 4 years and has made a kind of peace with the view from the margins. A black car pulled up, the kind of car that reorganizes a street when it parks. Don Rafael Correnti stepped out. He looked well. The gray-white pallor was gone. In its place was the vigorous color of a man who has been forcibly rested by doctors and has hated every minute of it. He was dressed in an overcoat that cost more than my annual rent. He walked to my curb, looked at the concrete, and sat down right next to me, precisely and without ceremony, as if sitting on a curb outside a delivery door was the most natural thing in the world for the most feared man in the city. We sat in silence for a moment. Two people on a curb, a Don and a dishwasher. "Tell me what happened to your career," he said. I told him. All of it, Haverden, the testimony, the legal team, the emails, the manufactured doubt, the firing, the license, Colin, the flat above the laundrette, the sink. He listened the way he'd listened on the floor, completely, without interruption, with the specific attention of a man who is not performing interest but experiencing it. When I finished, the silence was different. It was the silence of a man who has heard something that activates a part of his brain the world would prefer he didn't use. "I have a situation that requires someone with your analytical training," he said softly. "Assessing substances, verifying supply chains, making sure that what my people consume is what they think they're consuming. You would be a well-paid consultant. It does not require a clinical license. It requires you to know what you know, and what you know is what saved my life on Saturday." He paused. "Separately, and this is a separate matter. Nell, I want to be clear about that. I have been told that the evidence used against you in the Haverden case was constructed, manufactured, emails altered, data selectively presented, expert witnesses coached. I know some lawyers who find that type of construction professionally interesting. They are not gentle lawyers. I could make an introduction." I looked at the gray street, the delivery door behind me, the paper cup in my hands. "Why?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because you walked into a room full of men with guns and knelt on a floor and held a dying man's wrist and asked him about his daughter. You asked about Sophia, Nell. In the middle of saving my life, you made my child the thing I held on to. That kind of knowing, the kind that sees the human being inside the emergency, deserves to be somewhere it can be used. Not at a dish sink. Never at a dish sink. I did not say yes immediately. I want you to know that. Because the version of this story where the disgraced woman is rescued by the powerful man and accepts gratefully is the easy version, and my life has never been the easy version." I went home. I sat in my flat above the laundrette. I thought about it for 2 days. And then I called the number on the card he'd left and asked for a meeting. Not at the restaurant, not at his office, not on his territory. At a cafe on my street, my ground. He came alone. No driver, no entourage. He sat across from me at a small table, and I told him what I wanted. "I don't want money," I said, or, "I do, I need money. I'm a dishwasher, I need to eat, but money isn't the thing that was taken from me. What was taken was my name, my credibility, the world's belief that when Nell Gorley says it's aconitine, it's aconitine. That's what I want back. Not a consulting fee, my name. The lawyers are a start, but I want more than a legal win. I want to testify again. I want to sit in a room and say what I know under oath with my name on the record, and I want the record to show that Nell Gorley was right in the first place and that the people who destroyed her were liars. I don't want to be vindicated quietly. I want to be vindicated specifically." He looked at me across the cafe table. The most powerful man in the city, being told by a former dishwasher what her terms were, and his face, the face I had watched on a dining room floor, the face I had watched come back from gray-white to pink, did something I hadn't seen before. It softened. Not with pity, with respect. The specific respect of a man who recognizes stubbornness because he is built from it himself. "Those are hard terms," he said. "They're the only ones I've got." "Good," he said. "I'll make the introduction." I quit the dish sink. I called his lawyers. They were, as promised, not gentle. 6 months later, new documentary evidence miraculously emerged in the Haverden case, the kind of evidence that requires someone with terrifying motivation, unlimited resources, and the specific moral flexibility to go looking in places pharmaceutical companies think are sealed, internal emails, unredacted, communication logs that showed coordination between Haverden's legal team and the expert witnesses. The smoking gun was a memo, 3 sentences, written by Haverden's head of regulatory affairs to their lead counsel, that said the Gorley testimony is accurate, the interaction data confirms her analysis. Recommends settlement before retrial. They had known I was right. They had always known I was right, and they had destroyed me anyway because admitting I was right cost $400 million. The case was reopened. I testified again in the same courtroom, at the same podium, saying the same words I had said 4 years ago, except this time the record showed that every word was true. Haverden is currently being dismantled. Their CEO resigned. The drug was pulled. I have my own office now. A beautiful space with south-facing windows and massive bookshelves and the specific quiet of a room where serious work happens. My name is on the door. N. Gorley. Analytical Toxicology. I am doing the exact work I was always meant to do. for a very private, very powerful client who pays exceptionally well and who has never once, in all the time I've known him, looked at the size of me and calculated what I was worth. He looked at what I knew, and the knowing was enough. Sofia Correnti came back from Florence last spring. She had spent 8 months restoring a Baroque ceiling in a church. Painstaking months of work, brushstroke by brushstroke, rebuilding something beautiful from damage. She had her father's eyes and her father's stillness, and she found me having an espresso at the restaurant bar. She sat down beside me. "You're the one who sat on the floor with my father," she said. "Yes," I said. "He told me you asked him about me," she said. "In the middle of it, while you were saving his life, you asked him about his daughter." She looked at me, and in Italian, slow, precise, the Italian of a woman who has chosen her words carefully, she said, "Grazie, not for saving him, for making me the thing he held on to while you did." She did not say for what specifically. She didn't need to. I think about that conversation often. Not every day, but often. It means everything to have been the person who made a dying man's daughter the thing that kept him tethered to the world. Here's what I want to leave you with. A pharmaceutical company's legal team took 12 years of professional standing, a hospital contract, a marriage, and an apartment from me. They took my license, my credibility, and my name. They took 4 years of my life and spent them on a dish sink. But they didn't take the 6,000 words I wrote on aconitine poisoning. They didn't take the symptom cascade, or the atropine protocol, or the knowledge that sits in my hands and my voice, and the particular muscle memory of a woman who has been saving lives since she was 24. They couldn't take it because knowledge isn't a document or a license or a title. It's a thing you carry in your body, the way a musician carries music. Not in the instrument, but in the hands. On a Saturday night in a dining room I should never have walked into. My hands remembered what my title couldn't prove. The knowledge that 4 years of dishwater couldn't prune away was the only thing between a man and the floor. A dying man, on his back, with his heart at 49, looked at a gun pointed at the woman saving his life and said, "That's my toxicologist." He claimed me before I had reclaimed myself. He saw the 6,000 words under the stained apron before anyone, including me, had remembered they were there. So before you go, your answer. You are the dishwasher. You have recognized something no one else in the building has seen. You know the extreme risk of walking into a room full of armed Mafia guards. You know the risk of being wrong, and you know the cost of staying silent, not to you, but to the man on the floor. Would you come forward? Walk out of the kitchen, say who you are, and risk everything to stand behind what you know? Or would you stay in the kitchen, let what was going to happen happen, and go home safe to the dish sink and the flat above the laundrette and the life where nobody looks at you twice? I understand both answers. The room I walked into was not safe, but what I knew made staying in the kitchen impossible, because a woman who knows what she knows and does nothing with it is a woman who has let the people who destroyed her finish the job. I didn't let them finish. I walked out of the kitchen. I knelt on the floor. I held a dying man's wrist and asked him about his daughter. And the floor, the dining room floor, on my knees in a stained apron, saving a life, was the first place in 4 years where I felt like myself. Drop your answer below. I read everyone. And if you know someone who is doing work nobody sees, carrying knowledge that doesn't have a title anymore, surviving in a smaller room than they deserve, tell them tonight what I wish someone had told me at the sink. What you know is real. And it is waiting for the night when it is the only thing that matters in the room. And one more thing. If Nell's courage moved you tonight, you can help this story reach the next person who needs it. On your YouTube app, there's a hype button right below this video. Tap it, pick your points, 3 free every week, and it pushes this story onto a leaderboard where someone who's never heard of us might find their way here. Think of it as coming forward, one more time, in a small and quiet way.